Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about how to develop a simple Java application with MySQL database as its database. So here we have a simple Java application which basically allow user to store food data into the database. So here, let me try to run the application first and see the application in the first place. So we have a very simple interface with input form at the top, 4 buttons that perform 4 database operation, which is add data into database, delete data from the database, update data, and finally search data. At the bottom here we have a table which basically displays the data from the database. So the database basically is a simple MySQL database which can be accessed through phpMyAdmin, and we have the database FoodDB with table foods. So as you can see, this is a localhost access MySQL database through phpMyAdmin, and at the moment we have 2 data here, which is in table foods, consists of 4 fields: ID, food name, food price, and food description. And that basically corresponds to these 2 data displayed in this table. So you can see food ID and also all other information such as food name, food price, and food description. Alright, here I'm going to talk about how to connect to the database and to perform all the standard MySQL database operation, CRUD operation: create, read, update, and delete. Alright, so let me go back to the application here. So the application here basically consists of 2 Java codes, which is in the app.java and also food.java. So the main application basically resides in app.java. So this is basically just a very simple function-based application. And here what we have, so if you're familiar with Java programming and how Java programming works, so we have a class, a standard Java class, and here we have the application entry, the public static void main. So up here, these are all the variables, object, and also default value. Alright, so the application basically starts with the database connector, and the database connector basically handled by what we call as a JDBC driver, so which you need to what we call as a import first into your project, so that you can use the following example, which is from Java point. Here what you have is how to import the MySQL database connector, which is provided through you can download the MySQL connector here and then import the connector into your project, put it into the folder lib external folder, or you can use or you can set the class path. And in my project, I already put import into the Java library, and my Java or JDK version is version 17.0.2, which is already available or import with the connector. All right, so the JDBC or the MySQL database connector, I've set up the connector in the main method, which is here. Only need to run once, and then create a connector assigned to the database, which is here. Okay, so the connector defined in the class, where is it? The class connector here as a static connection object, and then assign to the driver manager and get connection to the MySQL connection. So since we are using localhost, so it should be no problem for us to do connections, and usually MySQL database connector run on port number 3306. The database name is fooddb. And if you have your database locally, should be no problem. But if you want to run this, let's say on your web hosting, you need to figure out how to directly access the database, the MySQL database through here. You need to enable that. You need to do some configuration to enable direct access, because usually when we develop application, we use server-side scripts such as PHP, Python, Node.js to do the bidding of the database. But here, since we do direct connection, so we need to figure out how to access the database directly from your web hosting. So once we set up the connector, this side here, this is just to create the interface. Create the object of the class. So if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, so this is basically just we create an object of the class itself and run the following methods. So the first method here basically just to create the interface, right? So this section here, this rather long section here, block of methods basically responsible for creating the user interface, such as the frame itself. This is all the frame, and the rest of the interface, such as label. This is the label for food name. This is the input text field for the first one. For the food name, text field for the food price, so you can directly see each of the relation of each of these here. Okay, so you have label, food price, food description, buttons. There are 4 buttons here. You can see the all handled by J button with their objects. And here I use just what we call as a fixed location with the positional parameter where the widget should, or the UI element should be. Okay, so this is a fixed location on top of this frame UI. So once we created the user interface, as you can see, each of the element inside, or each of the buttons here, binded, okay, to what we call as a listener. Okay, so the listener basically listen to the operation such as click, delete, update, and search. And as you can see, for the first listener, add button listener here. So the button listener here listen to this object add food listener, which is available at the bottom down here. All right, so down there. Okay, so this add food listener, which implement the action listener for click operation, and this operation implement the following override methods, which is action perform. But later I'm going to talk about this. Before that, we're going to go back and move to the next statement. So each of the statement here handled by their own listener: add food listener, delete food listener, update food listener, and search food listener. So each of the listener here handle all each correspond to their own operation: delete, update, search, and create, read, update, and delete. Sorry. All right, so once we have that, we have created the user interface, we set the frame size, we set everything. The next statement here is to load the initial data. Okay, so we have the user interface, the table, and all the buttons being laid out to the user interface here. Next, we need to load the data. Okay, so the user interface is ready, and then we need to load the data for the first time. When we run the application, the data automatically display here. And that basically handled by this method called load data. All right, so the load data method here, so this is actually a very simple, straightforward operation. So the first thing here is to create the food list. So the food list here, the object basically created through this array object. We call it array object. So the array object here basically defined through the class food. Okay, you can create your own custom array or even string array if you just want to have string array. But here I created a simple class called food, which consists of variables. There are 4 variables here: the food ID, food name, food description, food price, with their own with the constructor here to provide an initial data. I didn't create any private variable here just to keep things simple. But if you want to, go ahead, but you need to create the setter and getter method for that to work. But here everything is a public, so that I can easily access each of the variable without having to call the setter and getter method. Alright, so once you have your array to load the data into, we perform the SQL query. So here I created a statement by using the connector that we have defined in the public static void main. So the connector is already there. So we have defined the connector, create the statement, and then we execute the statement and assign to the RS. RS mean here is if we look back at the definition up here, this is RS, the result set, the array result set object. Okay, so we have assigned that, and whatever the query that is being executed through the statement here, this is the SQL. So you need to be familiar with the SQL statement. Select all from table food, so I didn't do any fancy query here, just a simple straightaway query. Select all the data from table foods. So once we have the record set object, the first thing that I do here is clear the initial food list if there's any. Okay, so clear the food list array. If there's any data, we just clear first. And here to assign or to give the value to the food list array, so we use the rs.recordNext. So you have the data in the array, so which basically consists a record that retrieve from the query, and then we add that into our food list object. Okay, so we use the food list add. So the food list add consists of 4 parameters. We have it here defined in this constructor: integer food string, string food name, double food price, string food description, which we need to provide here. Okay, so there are 4 parameters here: column index 1, column index 2, column index 3, and column index 4, which is coming from the record set. Okay, get integer, get string, get float, and get string. So those are, we loop the data from the record set and assign it into the list array. The DTM set row count here, this is just to reset data model for the table, because here we use table. Okay, we have table here. So the record set, we define the record set here for the table, create the table object, and then create the header for the table, and then set the data model. We call it data model object, which basically will host the data array before we put it into the table. And here just a little override functions to disable cell editable, just to disable that. Okay, and that's for the data model. So for the data model, going back to the load, where is the load method there? Load method there. So what we have here, this is just this section here, just to populate our data model in the table. So how do we do that? So we reset the data model, and then we loop back the food list array here. Okay, we get the size, we do the for loop, and then we create an object for each, and then add that into data model by using add row. Okay, so this is for the purpose of display the data back into array. Into the table. Okay, we already have the food list array here for our manipulation, but for the data table itself, we need to create data model and populate that with the data model. Okay, so once we have that basically allows, so when we first run the application, that basically will load the initial application. Okay, so if I close this one more time and run the application, press F5 to run. And you have this. Okay, so you have the data loaded into table and input whatever that we want to input. Okay, so that's for the loading of the data into the interface, creating the interface and load the data into it. This might not be the best method, but this is basically how I do it. You can create more fancy methods, classes, database manager, whatnot. That is up to you, but this is the simplest method that I think that should get you into the game of developing Java with MySQL. Alright, so once you have that, now we go back to the listener. So every time I click on this add, so let me try to add one data. Let's say pasta. Okay, price like 4 ringgit 50 cent. Description, pasta with carbonara sauce. Right. So if I click on add, okay, so we have that over there. The ID is auto ID, so I didn't do anything for the ID. I've deleted some data before this, so that's why you get ID number 4. So you can see that there's new data into the table here. So how that's being done, so focus on the add food listener again. So the food listener, the button basically listen to this food listener. So this food listener implement what we call as action perform, which click. And here we first inside this method called action perform. What we do is we get all the value from our text field. Food name, food price, food description. There are 3 data that we need. And then we check if the food is empty or price is empty, description is empty, then we just display. Let's say like if I click on this, it shouldn't be able to, it's not framed here, but should be framed, but it didn't display. Let me check later on. Oh yeah, the data is there already, but I added, let me just search. It didn't add any, so let me just remove everything. I didn't put anything. It should display this. Please enter food info. Okay, so it should display this with the J option pane, show input dialog. If no data, alright. So this, sorry, this is search. Load this one. Okay, so if this one, search, update, add food here. So if no data, then we just display this. But if there's data, then we perform statement. Okay, so this statement here, we create a connector, create a statement, execute update. Okay, we use method called execute update, and then we perform the SQL transaction here, insert into table foods. We provide all the fields, provide all the value by using this concatenation. Okay, food name, food price, food description, which comes from these three input variable. So once we perform the SQL transaction, and we need to put it into try and statement. Okay, if you don't put it into try and catch statement block, you can end up with error here. Okay, so load data. So refresh the data again, but you might need to check if the statement is a success or not, because sometimes you might get that problems. But I didn't do that here, so you might need to do some checking of the statement, if the statement is a success or not. So if success, then load the data. If not success, don't load the data. So you can just modify from here. The load data, again, it called the load data to refresh with a new data. So this is basically just to refresh. We call back the same method here to refresh the data. So this is basically just to refresh back the data so that we have the new data. Okay, so the table here will be refreshed with new data. Okay, so that is the logic here. So that is the add food listener. So you can add new data to the database. So if you check the database, table food here, you should be able to see the additional data, but I'm not quite sure. There's something wrong with the database. Okay, so you can see that the new data is there. Pasta with carbonara sauce, new data. All right. Okay, so we have the insert operation already. The next operation is delete. So for delete operation, what I have done here is basically, let me try check the button delete. So this delete operation here, implemented by the delete food listener. So this delete food listener basically perform delete operation. So the delete operation will basically get the data from the selection of the data. Okay, so here you need to select the data first. Let's say you want to delete this data or this data. So when you select this and press delete, it will let you know the swing tester, what is called swing tester. I'm not quite sure what is that, but it let you know, are you sure you want to delete nasi ayam? Are you sure you want to delete pasta? Are you sure you want to delete nasi lemak? Alright, so that basically allow you to do that. So if I click yes, okay, so if I delete yes, you can see that the data successfully deleted from the table and also from the database. So if you look at the database here, so the data is no longer there. Right. So how do I implement that? So to be able to implement that, so we need to go back and check on the table listener. Okay. So the table listener here, what we have, go back to the table listener, is very important because I based the delete on that. So this one, where is table? JTable, we call it JTable. Okay, here. So JTable add mouse listener, which is click listener. When I click on this or click on this, so those are the listener. So it basically implement mouse listener or listen to the mouse listener. So the mouse listener, what we have here is to get the value first. Okay, to get the value first from each row. Okay, so the implementation is through the row at point, column at point, and then we just if row and column. So we get the value and display the value by using set text to the text field first, but then I created an object for for that one object only, because I depended on this object to be able to delete the data. Without the data, I cannot delete. Okay, so if I didn't select anything, but now I already selected, so which is cannot do anything at all. It can be deleted. Okay, so just be careful on that. So if you press delete and then yes, and then the data will be deleted. Right, so create an object first for food, and then based on the data here, so we delete the data here because I define food as a public object. It can be accessed from the class. Not the best method, again, not the best method, but it get the job done. So once we have the object, and then we can go back to the button delete. Okay, so update delete food listener, and here we have the show confirm dialog is implemented through here, and check if the result from the confirm dialog yes, and then we just perform the statement, and then check if the I need to check. Okay, so I need to check if the food is not equal now, so that I need to make sure that the data is there. Okay. And then execute delete from table food where ID is equal food ID, because I need the food ID to be able to delete from database by using the SQL statement, and then finally load the data again, refresh the table. Okay. Next we have update. Okay, so if you want to update, also the same. So the update listener button implemented by the update food listener here. So this is basically the same with insert, but we need to use execute update, because we have to implement update food statement SQL, and then we need to get the object. Okay, so for the ID, there are multiple ways of doing that to get the ID of the data, but this is basically how I implement. Again, not the best method. Okay. So you have your food ID and everything, all the data that you want to update. I want to update food name, food price, and food description. Allow user to do that. So and then execute the statement again, and then load the data to refresh the data. Right. So you now can see the flow of the logic. So once you have that for the update, the final operation is for search. Okay, so this is search food listener implemented through the search food listener here. Okay, so here I use the option pane, so user can just search, okay, and then enter their food name. So and then it basically implement the same operation or logic as load data, but here we just want to search. Implement a special select statement by using like statement. Okay, so like parameter here allow us to search by food name only, because I just state the food name. Let's say like the data here we have ayam, okay, chicken. Okay, so press OK. So you can see that's only ayam display here. Okay, so only ayam display here. So that's what we wanted to do. It basically search based on the select statement, and then search by the like statement, select. Okay, so that is the same. You can see that when you compare load data here and also the search food listener implemented here, they are the same. The only difference is that based on the SQL query here. Okay, so the SQL query can allow you to search like statement. Okay, like statement. Okay, let's say I want to search for nasi, which is rice. Press OK. So found 2 data. Because we only have 2 data in the database, so the search is not very extensive. So you get the idea. It's search based on the likeliness of the search parameter that we have from this show input dialog. It's very easy. Alright, so that's it. Very simple Java application that you can implement or you can use as an example. There are hiccups here and there. If you want to further improve the application, go ahead. You can use this in your project or simple project. If you want to use MySQL database as your database, but you might get some problem if you want to really implement through the through web hosting, because of the requirement to be able to directly access the MySQL database that usually hidden from user. Okay, now you know. So all the code example will be available in the description. You can access my link, GitHub link, that will provide you with all the code example, and also the database. You can go to my GitHub, and then even I provided the export SQL that you can use to import into your database. Okay, you can just use the import tab here and then import that SQL file into your project. But you need to make sure that you have your database name first here. Okay, and then you can just choose file and then choose that database. All right. So very simple implementation of Java with MySQL database. I hope that can be beneficial for you in one way or another. Just a very simple example. Okay, very simple example, not the prettiest example, but it get the job done. All right. So until then, have fun programming, have fun coding. Always keep learning. Bye-bye.